Guys, wherever you look around these days, there are prices going up all around us. Whether it's the price of food, energy, restaurants, hotels, you name it. Prices are rising rapidly. My barber even went as far as increasing my haircut price from £20 to £25. I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely feeling the heat. The inflation rate, as at the time I'm making this video, currently sits at a high of 3.2%, according to the Bank of England. And they're forecasting the official rate to go as high as 4%. Some fear that the rise in inflation would lead to a rise in interest rates, which would spell a disaster for a lot of people who have borrowed money through this period, whether they be families who've borrowed money or businesses for that matter. On top of that, some people even say the official numbers of inflation really underestimate the true reality of the inflation rate we should know about, which means that we are even poorer in reality. So today I really want to unpack why we're getting poorer each day because of inflation. So rather than just sit back and have prices announced to us and increasing all around us, we need to take some action. We need to own inflation and make inflation work for us instead. If you're really enjoying this video and you're getting value from it, do me a favor and please hit that like button, because that encourages so many more people to watch a video like this one. For those who are new to our channel, my name's Ken of the Humble Penny and Financial Joy Academy. What we do on this channel is to give you guys the tips, the insights and the practical hacks to help you work towards a dream life of financial independence and money joy. All right, let's dive straight in. So what on earth is inflation? Inflation is the measure of how goods and services increase in price over time. So for example, if you've got high inflation, it means that you can't buy as much goods and services with the money that you currently have. Which means practically that if your salary, for example, is not rising in line with inflation, then it means that your living standard falls as a result. Low inflation, on the other hand, means that prices are rising slowly, and this is usually a good thing for customers. The Bank of England usually sets inflation at a rate of around 2%. They consider this to be a low and stable target for inflation. But at the moment, that rate of inflation has almost doubled, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so what drives inflation? So there are two broad groups of things that actually drive inflation. One is goods and services, and the second is the money that we use to purchase those goods and services. So from this end, on this side, we can look at demand and supply. So on one end, you can say that the increase in demand for goods and services therefore leads to a rise in prices, therefore driving inflation. Yeah. Or we could say that a decrease in the supply of goods and services, as we're currently seeing at this moment with the pandemic and so on, things are restricted, you have less food on shelves, things like that. A decrease in supply of goods and services leads to higher inflation, with prices increasing as a result. But let's talk about money. And I've put this here just kind of remind us that an increase in the supply of money, say for example with central banks printing money, a process known as quantitative easing, an increase in the supply of money leads to prices going up, because people have there's so much more money in the economy to be able to purchase more goods and services, and that therefore drives up prices. So how is inflation actually measured? Okay, so inflation's measured by two key measures. These are both called indexes. And here we've got the consumer price index and the retail price index. Both of these are a list. An index is a list of about 700 items made up of things such as meat, dairy, bread, etc. So essentially about 700 items, of which their prices go up and down every single month, creating essentially a change from one month to another. And that change from one month to another is tracked by the Office for National Statistics, therefore creating a rate of inflation either known as the CPI, which the Bank of England actually track. This is the one that they focus on. And then there's another one called the RPI, the Retail Price Index. And I'll explain in a second how these two differ and why they're very important to us. Now, the Retail Price Index, RPI, is usually higher than the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And that the core reason, and it's not the only reason, the core reason why the RPI is higher than the CPI is because of property costs. So the consumer price index does not include property costs, whereas the retail price index does include property costs. This then means that the RPI rate actually sits at this very moment at around 3.8%, compared to the CPI rate, which is published in the media and so on, which currently sits at around 3.2% and tracked by the Bank of England. Now, what's very interesting about these two rates is, as I mentioned earlier, the RPI includes mortgage interest costs, i.e. property costs. But more specifically, these two rates differ because they are attached to different types of things in the economy. So say, for example, the CPI specifically is linked to things such as the state pension, housing benefit, income support, universal credit, statutory sick pay, job seekers allowance, and so on. Now, this matters for us as savers and investors, and I'll tell you why in a sec. The CPI, which is the lower rate, is very interesting. The powers that be link their spending and expenditure, i.e. when they have to pay out money for things such as the state pension and benefits, they link that to the lower CPI rate, which at the moment is at around 3.2%. But for the things where they are earning an income, where an income's coming into the economy, they link that to the higher RPI rate. Okay, so the retail price index, which is at the moment around 3.8%, is linked to things such as car tax, which we pay for, train tickets, alcohol duty, tobacco duty, interest on student loans, which a lot of you guys can relate to, mobile phone tariffs. Essentially, the things we are paying for are linked to the higher rate of the RPI, whereas the things where we are meant to be getting something from the powers that be and so on is linked to the lower rate of the CPI. Now you might be asking yourself, why does all this matter? Why should I care, Ken, between RPI, CPI? Who cares? The reason we should care is that if you really want to protect yourself against inflation and beat inflation, you need to ask yourself, which inflation rate should I be protecting myself against? And my response to that would be that even though the Bank of England aims to reduce the lower CPI rate, which at the moment is 3.2%, we should focus our efforts on that higher RPI rate, which includes property costs, and make sure that we are taking the practical steps to beat that higher rate of inflation such that we are not getting poorer every day. So this means that if you are going to your boss, for example, and negotiating a salary increase, focus on the RPI rate where possible. Now, it's worth mentioning that the government announced recently in November 2020 that they are going to be overhauling the RPI rate. In fact, what they're doing is that they're introducing a new measure of inflation known as the CPIH, which, as they say, is made up of the CPI rate plus what they're calling owner-occupiers housing costs. So they're introducing a measure known as the owner-occupiers housing costs with the CPI rate to create this new CPIH rate, which, according to my research, is due to come into force at around February 2030. So I'm just mentioning that as an FYI. All right, so let's talk about how on earth inflation actually keeps you and me poorer every day. The first way it does it's by reducing the purchasing power of money. Rising inflation reduces the purchasing power of your currency, whether you've got pounds or dollars or euros or whatever. You are able to buy less of what you're normally able to buy with the same amount of money. Or it might mean that, for example, if you went to order a coffee where you might have been paying, I don't know, £2.50 for a coffee, you might now be paying £3 or something just a bit more than that. The second way inflation makes us poorer is that it encourages spending. Let's say, for example, prices are going up and people go into a bit of a panic and go and start to buy things in advance, things that they might not ordinarily be buying just now. They might want to go and buy them now because they see prices are going up. Say, for example, people might want to go and fill up their freezers with frozen foods because they are buying ahead of time. In the same way, businesses might want to go away and invest in equipment that they might not ordinarily want to invest in just yet because they are trying to beat those prices going up. The third way inflation keeps us poorer is that it increases the cost of borrowing. Through a process known as monetary policy, central banks try to manage inflation by adjusting interest rates. So when inflation rises, we expect that interest rates might also rise in response. This then has a negative impact on households, on individuals, families, businesses who have borrowed money as a way of getting by. It's also worth mentioning, though, that inflation can reduce the cost of borrowing. So an example is this. Let's say, for example, that you borrowed £1,000 or $1,000 and you were paying an interest rate of about 2%. In this scenario, the real value of your debt is actually decreasing a lot faster than what you're paying off in total principal and interest payments on that particular debt. In that scenario, inflation in a way is working in your favor. Next is that it discourages savings. Now, we all know how low the interest rates on savings accounts are at the moment, and they've been like that for many years. It's highly unlikely that interest rates on savings would come anywhere near exceeding the rates of inflation. So that means that if you are actually leaving money in your bank account right now, if you go and log into your bank account, you've got money in there right now, it means that the value of that money is actually being eroded in real terms. You're essentially getting poorer by leaving that money in your bank account. Next is that inflation slows down wealth creation and actually potentially delays retirement for people. Now, I'm mentioning this because some of us might invest our money and you might earn the odd 2% or the odd 2.5%. without paying a close enough attention to inflation. What that means essentially is that your money in real terms is actually not working for you, okay? And you might find that your goals might be delayed as a result of your money not working as hard for you, i.e. your money is not achieving a return that far exceeds the RPI rate of inflation. Now, I know it's not very easy for you to earn really high returns on investing your money, but the point remains that we need to aim to invest our money in the right environment. We've made lots of videos on this particular topic, which I'll link to below and above for you to head over and check out. But one point I wanted to make to you is that the level of returns you need to generate to beat inflation is worth pointing out, i.e. we need to consider tax in this particular topic, depending on whether you are a high rate taxpayer or a basic rate taxpayer. So I've got here on my phone some notes I wanted to read out. So in order for you to beat the current RPI rate of 3.8% of inflation, you would need, assuming you're a high rate taxpayer, you would need to generate a return of 6.3% on your money. Why? Take the number 3.8% and divide it by 0.6. Yeah, which is the net income you would get if you were paying 40% tax, okay? That would give you 6.3%. Now, assuming you apply that same logic to the current CPI rate of 3.2%, as a high rate taxpayer, you would need to generate a return of 5.33% to beat inflation. And the way you work that out is 3.2 divided by 0.6. Again, if we apply that logic to a basic rate taxpayer, respectively, you would need to generate returns of 4.75% and 4% in order for you to beat inflation. You work out 4% by taking 3.2, which is the current CPI rate, and divide that by 0.8, which is the portion of your net income you expect to get as a basic rate taxpayer who pays 20% tax. Now, how can you beat inflation? Okay, we've talked about the problems. Now let's focus on the positives. How can we beat this thing? The mindset here is that as prices go up, we should position ourselves to own the very things that are going up in price. Okay, so we want to own productive assets, things that are generating income, generating rent, generating dividends. Those are the things we want to try and focus our money to be invested in. So the first way to beat inflation is to invest your money in companies that raise prices during high inflation. Now, if a company can raise its prices, I'm sure you've gotten letters from companies telling you that they're raising their prices. If a company can raise its price during a period of high inflation without losing its customers to a competitor, then that company is in a very good position. Warren Buffett once said that the single most important decision in evaluating a business is pricing power. So really, you want to try and focus on the likes of blue chip companies, companies that have that capacity to increase their price in a time of a rising inflation rate. The next thing you can do is to invest in good businesses with low capital needs. During times of high inflation, businesses with low capital needs who are still able to maintain their levels of earnings should actually perform way better than businesses that have the need to invest more money into their businesses at the higher price as a result of high inflation. This is actually another reason on a personal level why we are big fans of investing in online-based businesses. The next way to beat inflation is to invest in yourself to be the best at what you do. Consider this. Imagine before prices increased that you had educated yourself, you become a professional or an expert in a particular area, but you did it on old money, on old pounds or old dollars, i.e. before the prices started to increase. You are then able to adjust your services accordingly in order to charge higher prices, generating higher income but costs based on old pounds or old dollars. So investing in yourself is essentially one of the most powerful ways to maintain your own purchasing power over time. All right, the next way is to own property. Now, the beauty of owning property is that the property can increase in value as prices increase, but the property also generates income. It generates a return by way of income and rents, which can also increase in price as these prices increase. So investing in property is a great way to hedge against inflation. But do note though, that if you invest in property, for example, as a buy-to-let investor here in the UK or wherever, and you have a mortgage on that property, with rising inflation usually comes rising interest rates, which could then impact the payments that you might have to make on a monthly basis on your property investment. If you don't want the hassle of being involved with physical property units and having a mortgage and things like that, another way to get exposure to the property market is to invest in real estate investment trusts, or REITs as they're often called. All right, the next one is to invest your money in gold. Gold has historically had this characteristic of being a hedge for inflation. Fans of gold will tell you that, this is what they put their money into. But interesting though, that Warren Buffett is not such a fan of gold, interestingly. Here's what he said. He said, if you own 1 ounce of gold for an eternity, you will still own 1 ounce at its end. Okay? Which is really interesting because what he's really interested in is investing his money in productive assets. Assets such as property and companies in the stock market. But historically, gold has been known as a hedge for inflation. Next one is to avoid traditional bonds. Now, all signs seem to point to a bleak future for bond investors in such a climate. And with rising inflation, that essentially spells a bit of trouble for investments in bonds, okay? So personally, I would suggest steering clear of such investments during such times. Okay, so the next way to beat inflation is to negotiate a higher salary, okay? I know this is very obvious, but it's worth mentioning because the mindset a lot of us have at the moment is the mindset of fear and trying to protect our jobs and not wanting to make any sound so that we don't get sacked or whatever. But, if you are confident about the value you bring to your employer, and there's a lot of news about inflation at the moment, and it's been going on for quite a while, then one of the best ways you can really counter this is to go up to your employer and negotiate an above inflation pay rise. Again, remember, focus on that RPI rate, not the CPI rate, because the RPI is a higher rate of inflation. And the final suggestion is to limit your wants. This is something that is under everybody's control right now, okay? Rather than want more things, I know we're all coming out of the situations we're in. A lot of us want to travel and have fun and do various things. But if you can limit some of those wants, then this is a really good way to combat inflation, simply by paying a much closer attention to your costs. I'd suggest checking out our Budget for Life tool if you're new to budgeting, or if you're looking for a simple budget tool that's not complicated, but something you can own for life. Then I put a link below and above to our Budget for Life tool for you to head over and check it out. Okay guys, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these 8 ideas that I've suggested today for how to beat inflation are you actually going to implement? Are you going to explore and make real in your life? Because inflation's real. We're literally all getting poorer if we do nothing, okay? So we need to take action. Let me know in the comments which of those you're actually going to explore and do something about. As I mentioned earlier, if you all really enjoy our videos, we'd love it if you hit the subscribe button, show us some love for the work we put into our channel here at The Humble Penny. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. And as ever, in all things, be thankful and seek joy. Take care and bye for now.